It was treacherous. It was the most appalling behaviour. I'm really profoundly distressed by it. It is so scandalous.
Stephen Flynn, then, you have reported Peter Mandelson to the police.
Yes. Rightly there was a lot of talk today about peerages, but when I was looking at the details which were emerging, primarily thanks to Dan's excellent work, I thought we should instead be talking about the police and potentially prison, because what we have seen is potentially insider trading from within the very heart of a Labour government, with sensitive financial information relevant to all our lives being passed directly to what was a notorious international paedophile, but also someone who worked in the financial markets in America. And the seriousness of this demands a serious response. I thought that the government's attempt to focus on a peerage was right in one sense, but didn't go far enough, which is why I chose to report the matter to the police myself.
Do you back Stephen Flynn reporting it to the police?
Yeah, I think I might have suggested it. So I don't agree with Stephen always, but I agree with him on all of this. It was treacherous. It was the most appalling behaviour. I'm really profoundly distressed by it. It is so scandalous, taking advantage of having. Like, if you're in the cabinet and you're essentially acting on behalf of people abroad against your own government, passing on secrets like, oh, the Prime Minister's about to resign, I finally persuaded him to, talking about secret tunnels under, from Number 10. I mean, it's completely unforgivable, and I'm really, really shocked at it, really shocked.
Dan Needle, you have been looking through these Epstein files over the weekend and today, and these emails keep coming. What do you highlight this evening?
So most recently, there's some emails concerning Larry Summers, the US Treasury Secretary. There was a meeting between him and the Chancellor. A minute of that meeting was sent by Mandelson's private secretary to Mandelson. And this was a very sensitive meeting discussing changes in US bank regulation. It would have been, I expect, of the highest interest for Epstein and the people around him. And Mandelson sent it just a few minutes later to Epstein. Epstein didn't just receive it passively, he then asked some quite detailed questions about the wording of the regulation Summers had been discussing. Was the word may used? Was the word shall used? There's even a suggestion Mandelson might raise it with Summers at a meeting the next day. Then Mandelson had that meeting the next day with Summers. Mandelson's private secretary passed him minutes, sent him minutes by email of the meeting, as you normally would, and within seconds Mandelson flicked it across to Epstein.
That is quite... I mean, I can see you two shaking your heads as Dan Needle is describing those private minutes. It's quite extraordinary.
It's those private minutes, but it's at that time. You know, when Gordon Brown and his team were trying to save the economy, were trying to save the world economy, were doing everything they could, were up night and day trying to do this, and in their midst there was somebody working against them and working for other interests, the interests of a man like Epstein, who's given years before, but given money to Mandelson and his husband. I mean,
on that point, shocking. You will know that Lord Mandelson's statement over the weekend was that he doesn't know if those bank statements were authentic, and he needed to investigate them himself.
Yeah, no, I mean there are bank statements from JP Morgan allegedly, which show 3 payments of $25,000 each, and it might be that they are forged, and it might not be.
Yeah, look, this feels like an enormous
I've seen a lot
betrayal.
of bank statements. They look like bank statements.
Exactly, Dan. Exactly.
Okay. I'll take Dan's word for it then.
Yeah.
Okay. Nick, where are we tonight with all this?
Well, Vic, in the last few hours, we've had Peter Mandelson's first interview since the latest round of emails were released. This is an interview the Times did. They did it mainly on the 25th of January at his home in Wiltshire, but they went back to him on Sunday night after he stepped down from the Labour Party. Peter Mandelson described Jeffrey Epstein, likened him to dog muck, the smell that won't go away. And then listen to what Peter Mandelson said on the 25th of January about his sacking by Keir Starmer last year as UK ambassador to the US. He said it was like a 5:30 a.m. drive-by shooting. Suddenly I was at the centre of it as a result of historical emails of which I had no memory and no record. And then he said it felt like being killed without actually dying.
OK, well, I can hear you sighing, Stephen Flynn. Why are you responding like that?
Yeah, look, the one thing that we can't forget here is that Jeffrey Epstein abused young women and girls. He's a paedophile. The notions that in any way Peter Mandelson is the person we should be feeling sorry for about any of this is frankly absurd.
I think the other point is that it was open to Peter Mandelson at any time to tell us how bad things were. But instead, he kept lying and saying, oh, no, I don't think, no, there's nothing in that, and no, this is as far as it goes.
What he said is he couldn't recall most of this. Can't recall anything.
I mean, obviously, Peter Mandelson did recently apologise to the Epstein survivors. But in this interview, the Times went back to him on Sunday, and Peter Mandelson seems to be suggesting that he could continue to have a role in public life. He says, I'm a new Labour person and always will be, wherever the party is. And then he says, but I think I want to see change. I want to be more of an outsider looking in rather than the other way around. And then this. I want to contribute ideas that enable Britain to strengthen and to work for all in every part of the country. So Peter Mandelson still thinks he's a big figure. And it is important to say that he's been at senior levels of the Labour Party for nearly half a century. He was New Labour before New Labour. He was the one in the mid-80s who said, let's wave red roses, not the red flag. But when he was appointed as ambassador, Douglas Alexander did say that's a high-risk, high-reward approach. But today, Vic, it's been a very, very dramatic day, moving quickly. I was on the Today programme first thing, and the guidance from government was we don't want to do primary legislation to kick him out from the Lords. That's still the position, but the government, the Prime Minister, is now asking for a cross-party consensus to change the rules to kick people out of the House of Lords. Darren Jones, Chief Secretary of the Prime Minister, talking about how there's now a Cabinet Secretary investigation into Jeffrey Epstein and Peter Mandelson links. Then, of course, you had the Met investigation. In the last few minutes, the Prime Minister has said of that, the government has said it's right for the police to determine whether to investigate, and the government stands ready to provide whatever support and assistance the police need.
But on that point, in the House of Commons chamber today, I posed that very question to the Prime Minister. He chose not to answer. I posed a very similar question to Darren Jones himself.
On what specifically?
In relation to the police investigation, whether the police should be doing that. And this all comes back to judgment. Keir Starmer chose a political appointment to be ambassador in Peter Mandelson. He knew about the connection between Peter Mandelson and Jeffrey Epstein. He chose to ignore it. He chose to ignore that past in order to try and get a political benefit, just as he chose to allow Peter Mandelson to remain a member of the Labour Party until Peter Mandelson chose to leave. This is all about the Prime Minister's judgment or lack of.
OK, and we know that the Prime Minister, when he did sack him last September, said he didn't know the extent of the friendship, the association, the relationship. But Dame Emily Thornberry, has Stephen Flynn got a point here? It does come back to Keir Starmer? What do you think?
I think that it comes back to Peter Mandelson. I think that, Peter Mandelson... Would you have
appointed him, Emily?
I wouldn't have appointed him. I wouldn't have taken the risk.
You wouldn't have taken that judgment call, yeah.
But I would have, But, I would have allowed the Foreign Affairs Committee to interview him, which is what we asked to do. We wanted him in front of us before he went off to Washington, so we could ask him questions. And maybe he would have lied, but it would have been on the record, and people would know who they were dealing with. So we might have asked questions like, well, you've had a loan from Jeffrey Robertson in the past. Have you had any loans from anyone else recently? Yeah. I mean,
so are you saying the vetting wasn't good enough?
The vetting,
essentially,
the vetting was definitely not good enough.
Right.
The vetting. So it's not just vetting, but there's also something called there's vetting, which is pretty much like post Kim Philby. I mean, in terms of just how kind of it's really old-fashioned and not relevant. I mean, we've had the mandarins in front of us and asked them questions about that. And then you have due diligence. And due diligence is a separate thing where they essentially do a trawl of the internet and they put it on paper. I don't know how much they looked into. I don't know how much they put before the Prime Minister. But the one thing they didn't do was they didn't ask Peter Mandelson about it. So he was not asked about his relationship with Epstein if they did find it in their open source trawl for due diligence. And that hardly seems like due diligence to me. Surely you should be saying it is extraordinary, and things have now changed, and the rules have now changed. But that's what happened.
OK. Dan Needle, we knew about Lord Mandelson's judgment when it came to what you might call the social contact with Epstein, the paedophile. Do you think this is potentially about a possible abuse of power?
Yes. Those emails, those discussions would have been scandalous even if it was some completely innocuous Wall Street executive with none of Epstein's appalling history. We haven't discussed maybe the most appalling email exchange, which was in December 2009. The Brown government had proposed a tax on bankers' bonuses. The banks obviously weren't happy with this. And there's a discussion between Mandelson and Epstein where he is essentially helping JP Morgan through Epstein and how to lobby the government. He then goes further. There's a question from Epstein to Mandelson. He says, and I'll read it verbatim, should Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan, call Darling, the Chancellor, one more time? Mandelson says, yes, and mildly threaten. So that is a senior British cabinet minister advising a foreign bank that they should threaten the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
And the
it's not frivolous, it's not a joke.
And the evidence
he clearly
is,
meant
isn't
it,
it, Dan, is that they did. They did.
Jamie Dimon did call
yes, the evidence
Alistair Darling.
absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, that is...
It's in
Alistair Darling's book.
Well, Alistair Darling said in his book that he threatened not to buy UK government debt.
Yeah.
As a result of that call.
And there was the whole thing about the JP Morgan
and reconsider JP Morgan's
too,
plan to build a headquarters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Nick McPherson, who was Treasury Permanent Secretary at the time, put out a post on Blue Sky saying Alistair Darling and the official Treasury were always aware that investment banks had an inside track to number 10, but the brazen nature of that inside track is rather breathtaking. And there are senior figures in the Treasury who are saying they absolutely recall what Nick McPherson was saying. And I spoke to one government source. They say they think this is all very serious for Peter Mandelson.
And Victoria, you kind of picked up on a key point, and so did Nick, that Peter Mandelson has survived consecutive Labour governments, consecutive scandals, and continued to be appointed to really senior positions. And I actually think this is a cultural problem within Westminster and indeed the wider bubble around Whitehall, that if you're a rich, white, powerful man, that people turn a blind eye to the things that you do. It was the same with Andrew Mountbatten, Windsor, when last year we were being told, oh, you can't talk about these things, you shouldn't be discussing this in Parliament. The Prime Minister wouldn't make time for us to have a debate on these topics, despite it being so obvious to the public about what was happening. And the rehabilitation, the constant rehabilitation of Peter Mandelson over the years has been done by the very same people because, we go to dinner parties and he's great fun.
Okay,
and
so we've been agreeing until now, but I think this is too far. I mean, I think let me say this, that I wouldn't have appointed him, I wouldn't have taken the risk. But I understand why the risk was taken, because you have to be you have to be the ambassador to Donald Trump. We need to think laterally about how we're going to have an ambassador to Donald Trump. And actually, I haven't heard yet any criticism of the way in which he was an ambassador. During the time he was very effective, and he acted in the interest of the country, as far as I'm aware. Although, my confidence is so shaken now. But I mean, as far as I'm concerned, he did the job well. But it was risky. It was really risky.
Did he do the job better than anyone else who might have been appointed in that role, who did not have a previous association with Jeffrey Epstein?
I'm a big fan of Karen Pierce, who was the previous ambassador,
yeah.
and I could see the argument. If I had been, it wasn't me, but if I had made the job, I would have kept Karen Pierce on. But I understand why a risk was taken with Mandelson. So sorry, but if you are a victim who is looking at this and knows that Peter Mandelson was friends with Jeffrey Epstein, then I'm sorry, the word risk, political risk, doesn't really come into it. Yeah. What comes into it is right and wrong. And the fact is that the Prime Minister, and indeed consecutive others, decided that the connection between Peter Mandelson and Jeffrey Epstein wasn't that big a deal,
What mattered more was a political advantage with Donald Trump. And what message does that send to women, to victims right across these aisles? And that is a cultural issue.
But where does that ever finish? So you can have it's people who have committed the most heinous crimes, and any friend of theirs should never be given a job of any sort.
Let's look
I don't know.
I mean, there's another example of Matthew Doyle, who's now in the House of Lords. It's why the SNP have introduced a bill not just to remove Lord Mandelson, but also Matthew Doyle, because he allegedly has maintained a friendship previously with a convicted paedophile in Scotland, and the Labour Party put him into the House of Lords. I raised this issue just weeks ago.
And they are just claims, which I'm sure Matthew Doyle, if he was here, would push back on. I want to play you this clip, if I may. Last month, before the most recent batch of Epstein files was released, Laura Kuenssberg talked to Lord Mandelson and asked about his friendship with Epstein. Have a listen.
I mean, he in a sense had three buckets of people in his life: the business and the financial, the political and the academic, and then what he was doing with young women. It's possible that some people crossed over, but I didn't.
And in the light of the most recent emails, that doesn't necessarily stack up anymore, because he wasn't just in one bucket, as he put it. We can see that emails were forwarded by him about finance, business, Wall Street banks, JP Morgan, etc., etc. On the peerage issue, a cross-party consensus. Explain this to our viewers tonight. What does that mean, and how quick could something happen? I mean, you're both looking rather cynical.
I mean, the House of Lords, we're just like the House of Lords. I mean, it needs reform so much.
Well, abolished it.
Labour did promise that in their last manifesto.
For the last 100 years, I think.
So much that needs doing to the House of Lords.
But on this specific issue,
one of the problems is you have to pass a law in order to get rid of an individual peer.
Right.
It's ridiculous.
That doesn't have to take very long.
You two are Privy Councillors. Should he remain in the Privy Council?
No.
No.
So sorry, Lord Mandelson is on the Privy Council, you're both on the Privy Council. That is a formal body that advises the King. Should he be advising the King?
No.
So how does he get off the Privy Council?
I have no idea how that works. But when it comes to the Lords, look, we put forward a bill which the government could take forward. It's penciled in for the 13th of March, but let's bring it forward, which says that you can remove people from the House of Lords. I don't know why they're hiding behind this notion that you can create some consensus in the House of Lords to change their rules at an unspecified period of time in the future.
When it came up about Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, or Prince Andrew as we used to call him, the government said, you know, the King wouldn't want us to waste time on this in the Commons. How long would this take? Could this take?
I was up for it tonight. I'm sure Emily would have been there. We could do it whenever. The bill's sitting there. All they've got to do is take it forward.
To get agreement between the parties, and then hopefully we can get a bit of legislation.
That's the thing.
No, but I mean, obviously people agree in principle, and then when it comes to the details, it's like, oh well, who can we get rid of from the House of Lords, and what things should they be found guilty of, and should they go to prison, and this, that. I mean, you know, you can just imagine the debate. So there does need to be a bit of time spent on this to get it right.
Well, the BBC have approached Lord Mandelson for comment. He's previously raised questions about the authenticity, particularly about the bank statements which showed Epstein made payments of $75,000 to him, and he has said he regrets ever having known Epstein.